When I was 10 years old, I discovered magic. And suddenly, my entire world became about learning sleight of hand and acquiring magic equipment and performing for anyone who would watch. And along the way, I became intrigued by a little trick called the Chinese sticks. This was listed in a magic shop mail order catalog. And I guess it became something of an obsession. Because one night, in the middle of the night, about 3 or 4 a.m., I got out of bed, walked downstairs, woke up my mother, and asked, "How much do Chinese sticks cost?" I then turned around, walked back up the stairs, and went back to bed. Now, my mother was not amused, but I had no memory of it. I was sleepwalking. And the fancy name for this is somnambulism. And science doesn't have a lot of answers about it. Sleepwalkers may wake up in a different room than where they fell asleep. Others have been found in the kitchen, fast asleep, eating stuff out of the refrigerator. Hotel people have been found in elevators in their pajamas, snoozing away, riding up and down the elevator for no apparent reason. Well, it's very difficult for sleepwalkers to explain what all this feels like because, well, they're asleep. And in fact, they often have no memory of what happened. The memories they do have are usually due to being awakened during a sleepwalking episode, or if they find evidence of it the next day, or if they hear about it from family and friends. It's all a little weird, but most of us experience things that are vaguely similar. Have you ever been reading a book and suddenly you realize that you have no idea what you've read for the past 4 or 5 minutes? You read the words, but they have no meaning. So you try to back up and reread a page or two, but even then, nothing may register on your consciousness. How often do you drive somewhere and upon arrival have no memory of the trip? You got to your destination, but the journey itself was a vague blur. This is called highway hypnosis, and it's also known as being asleep at the wheel, not paying attention to what's important. So do you ever get the feeling that you're drifting through life, not going where you want to go? Do you wonder how you got to where you are today? Well, living consciously is about taking control of your life, thinking about your decisions rather than making them without thought. It's about having a life that you want rather than settling for whatever happens. And if you're drifting through life, or if you feel out of control, or you don't know how you got here, waking up to life could be your single most important task. Listen to the following questions. And if you find yourself saying yes to any of them, you might want to look into raising your consciousness level. Are you in a job, or a house, or a relationship that you fell into rather than what you actually want? Are you doing things that are given to you rather than what you want to do? Are you spending your time doing busy work instead of planning out and enjoying every day? Well, if you're used to being asleep at the wheel, and it's an easy rut to fall into, it may not be something that you can change overnight. Living consciously is a lifestyle, a skill, an art. It's not something you do just once. It's a habit that you form for life. And it's deceptively simple. Be conscious and think about everything you do. Make conscious decisions rather than doing things without thinking. And that's it. See you next week. Now, it sounds simple, but it's amazing how few people actually do this. And it's amazing how easy it is to live your life on cruise control and just do what we've always done because that's the way it's always been. It's easier that way, even if our lives are difficult. It's not easy to break out of our routines, to begin to live the lives that we want to live. It takes effort, energy, and constant vigilance to think about our choices, all of our choices. So how do we go about this? Well, here are just a few ideas about developing a new, expanded awareness or consciousness. Make reflecting on your life a regular routine. So whether you keep a journal or just make reflecting on your day part of your evening routine, or maybe you have a weekly session where you review your life, however you do it, it's important that you give your life some thought regularly. And keeping a journal is probably the best way to evaluate your life. I have a friend who has journaled for years, and she says that no matter what, she doesn't go to bed at night until she writes about all of the good things that happened that day. If you're guessing she never has a shortage of good things to write about, you're right. A lot of people resist the practice of journaling, and that's their choice. But if you really give it a try, you'll find that those thoughts that tend to run through your head on a continuous loop, when you put them on paper, it's very different than when you're just thinking about them. They can seem very logical when they're just running on a loop in your mind. The minute you put them on paper, you start seeing them for what they really are. One of our biggest challenges in this science of mind philosophy is making sure that what we're thinking is the truth. And one of the best ways to be more objective about our thinking is to write it out on paper. And then wait a couple of hours or a couple of days and look at what you wrote. And you may be surprised at how silly some of it is. On the other hand, you may read it and think it's profound. Regardless, there's something about reading what you were thinking about yesterday that tends to be clarifying today. Buckminster Fuller, the 20th century visionary, kept something he called the Cron File. And the Cron File was a journal in which he wrote down what he was doing, what he was thinking, and what he was feeling. And he did this every 15 minutes, every day, from 1920 to 1983. Now that may sound a little bit extreme, but then again, Buckminster Fuller lived a full life of astounding accomplishments. Here's another idea. At least once a year, and we're coming up on a new one pretty quickly, at least once a year, set or review your life's goals. What do you want to do in life? What is important to you? What do you want your life to feel like? Is there something you've always wanted to do but never quite got around to doing it? Maybe now is the time to commit to that. And if you've made up your mind to do it, how will you go about making it happen? Write these things down. Put what you've written where you'll see it often, and then act on what you've written. So important for us to set those goals and to work toward them. Shortly after moving here to Orlando a couple of years ago, I lost a person who was very important in my life. Jan McCart was a soprano who had sung in multiple opera houses in Europe and on Broadway. She was a producer and director. She started and ran 5 live theaters, and she created the theater program at Lynn University in Boca Raton, Florida. She was a huge influence on my performing career, and her brother Don, who was a Science of Mind minister, was a big influence on my ministry. Now, Jan was one of those people that you thought would live forever, and she did live a very long life, and I think it's because she always had a big project to work on. As soon as she finished that project, and she always finished it, she would start something else. The secret to her success and her forever young longevity was that she always had a big goal, and she was always working to achieve it. Here's another idea that'll keep you aware of your life and what's going on. Periodically review your relationships. The people we love are the most important treasures in our lives. Do you spend enough time with them? Do you show your appreciation for them? Are there ways you could improve your relationship? Do you need to apologize for anything? Do you need to forgive anything? Well, we probably all have some regrets about people that have passed out of our lives, things we wish we had said, things we wish we hadn't said, things we'd go back and change if only we could. But if that person is no longer around, it's too late. Death is a bad way to wake up to what might have been. So those are just a few ideas about how we can wake up to who we are and what we are and where we are. Of course, a lot of people don't really want to wake up. Have you ever hit the snooze button? And when you hit it, if you were awake enough to even think about it, you were probably happy knowing that you'd get a few more minutes of sleep, right? You may have been dreaming a really great dream, or you were super comfortable in bed and you just weren't ready to wake up. Maybe you got to bed late, or perhaps you had a hard time falling to sleep. In any case, waking up would be unpleasant, so it makes sense that you'd want to put off that unpleasantness. But what if this were a metaphor for your life? What if each time you hit the snooze button and chose to stay asleep, you missed precious opportunities to wake up to life? And what if each time you pushed the button, you were actually postponing your life? Would you push the button anyway? I did, for many years. I'd gotten into the habit of hearing the wake-up call and hitting the snooze button. I always had a reason. Now wasn't a convenient time, or it's too scary, or I'd tell myself I could deal with it later. Hit that snooze button. And ignoring these metaphorical wake-up calls became such a habit that eventually I didn't want to leave my bed at all. I wanted to continue sleeping. It was safe and warm and comfortable there. I could pull the covers over my head and pretend that the real world didn't exist. I could pretend that it was perfectly okay that I was sleeping my life away. Except it wasn't perfectly okay. I was slowly killing myself. I fell into a chronic low-grade depression, which led to periodic bouts of severe depression. I needed to wake up, but I didn't know how. So I tried this, and I tried that, but nothing really worked for me until I found my answers in the science of mind. And I think the reason the science of mind worked for me is that it has its basis in secular psychology, the kind practiced by doctors worldwide, as well as spiritual psychology. And I needed both, because beyond just sleepwalking through my days, I was also spiritually asleep. I'd been raised in a hardcore fundamentalist Baptist church, and although as a kid I really tried to walk the Baptist straight and narrow, none of it seemed to have any meaning for me. It seemed to be mostly about being against things. No drinking, no smoking, no dancing, no card playing, no bad language, no movies, no TV. I had no access to alternative spiritual ideas, so I put a lid on the spiritual part of myself and moved on as best I could. It would take years for me to discover the New Thought philosophy, but once I found it, it was just what I needed, because it's all about waking up. We used to have a wonderful mission statement: awakening humanity to its spiritual magnificence. One of my ministerial colleagues, when asked by a stranger what she does, replies, "I'm a wake-up specialist." I like that. You know, Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth." And perhaps we should strive to be the coffee of the world. Spiritual caffeine for a world that's half asleep. That thought always reminds me of Vicki Lawrence's Mama character when she would say to Carol Burnett, "For God's sakes, Eunice, wake up and smell the coffee." Well, the scriptures tell us, "Awake, you who sleep. Arise from the dead, and God will give you light." And that means to be fully awake with mindfulness. Don't just wake up. Smell the coffee. Turn to the light. Notice what's going on inside and outside. Without awareness, we're half asleep. I have a friend who had cataract surgery recently, and he's ecstatic at the results. He's seeing a brand new world. Colors are brighter, whites are whiter, everything is more vivid, and a similar thing happens when we're spiritually awakened. The scales fall from our eyes, and we see what's always been there, but was obscured. The spiritually minded life is about transformation, but we need to see clearly in order to know what needs to be changed. When we're half asleep, we're bundles of habits tossed around by chance or circumstance. The spiritual life involves making creative, conscious, disciplined choices about the kind of person we wish to be. Mindfulness is indispensable to this process. It takes effort to cultivate mindfulness. We all have a sleeping giant within, but there's so much going on in our lives that mindfulness gets forgotten. But if we truly want to wake up this sleeping giant, we need mindfulness, awareness. And so how do we develop it? Well, there are 4 levels of awareness that are a useful guide. Awareness of oneself, awareness of others, awareness of our surroundings, and awareness of reality. That's reality with a capital R. The first level of awareness is awareness of oneself. And this simply means actually experiencing yourself. In practicing mindfulness, we stay in touch with how our bodies feel, what kind of thoughts and images pass through our minds, what emotions we're feeling. And some people use cues to remind them to be aware. For example, if you see a penny lying on the sidewalk, pick it up. Say, "Thank you, God." It's a way of remembering that though our good may come through many channels, there's only one source. When your telephone rings, you might want to think, "Hello, God." This will remind you that the person on the other end of the line is an expression of God, just as you are. And another valuable aid to mindfulness is to practice doing only one thing at a time, and doing it to the best of your ability with total focus, rather than attempting several things at once or letting your mind wander off to who knows where. Multitasking is not a spiritual practice. The word mindfulness suggests fullness of mind, finding richness and meaning in our experience, and being totally aware of who we are. And it takes an inner awareness to have an expansive, outward-looking life. On the wall of my office, there is a saying, "Seeing within changes one's outer vision." Look outward from within. And this brings us to our second level of awareness, awareness of others. Awareness of the self is, of course, very important, but we must be careful that this doesn't slip into self-preoccupation. We are all parts of one great magnificent whole, and we're here to mix and mingle with all expressions of spirit. Awareness of others means being aware of them as people, not as objects, appreciating them as individuals, not just as part of a group. How aware was I of the people I encountered yesterday? Did I notice how they were doing, how they were feeling, what kind of day they seemed to be having? When interacting with people at the store or the bank or wherever, a simple smile or a heartfelt thank you might be all you need to do to brighten someone's day. You may never know the difference you make just by being aware of the other person's spiritual magnificence. The third level of awareness is awareness of our surroundings. We can practice mindfulness on this level by simply trying to notice things. This provides a much richer experience of life, but it's not always easy to do. We're so used to rushing around that we lose the ability to stop and experience the world we inhabit. How much of your world, and it is your world, did you really see when you drove here today? In our two main entryways, there are some really interesting plants. Did you notice them? If I were to offer you $1,000 right now, could you describe them accurately? The more we look, the more we see. And in some ways, it might be easier to see the environment in the countryside, but we can practice mindfulness anywhere. For example, noticing our surroundings while we're driving takes us out of ourselves if we've become anxious or self-preoccupied or just half asleep. We can be aware of the weather, the passers-by, the buildings, the signs along the way. What effect is it all having? What do we want to take in, and what do we want to filter out of our awareness? Yesterday afternoon, when I was working on this section of the talk, I heard a bird outside the window singing a little song. It was repeated about every 10 seconds for 2 or 3 minutes. And I was intrigued by the fact that the song was exactly the same with every rendition. The notes were never sharp and never flat. They were always perfectly on pitch. What does that mean? I have no idea. But the experience was interesting. It was free, and it added joy to my day. And finally, there's awareness of reality. Reality with a capital R. It's so important that we learn to see things as they really are, to be aware of the truth of any situation, not just in theory, but deep down, so that when we're confronted with difficulties, we react calmly and positively rather than panicking or falling apart. We can neutralize the negative by affirming the opposite, the positive truth. For example, if you're struggling financially, the truth is that the universe is infinitely abundant, and that abundance is available to you. If you're ill, the truth is that you have a perfect spiritual prototype at the core of your being, which is whole and complete. And if whatever is standing between you and that perfection is removed, healing will result. By staying in the consciousness that God is always right where we are, no matter what, we stay awake to the fact that the same power that creates the universe is more than capable of resolving any problem we might have. One of the first Science of Mind books I ever read stated, there is an answer and a right answer to every problem. And that's a good thought. But I've modified it over the years. I now say there is at least one right answer to every problem. Sometimes our answers are very unexpected, and sometimes we miss out on this answer. But if we're open to the possible, we can take advantage of another answer. It's largely a matter of letting the light shine on our circumstances so we can clearly see the truth of what is there. In the Hawaiian spiritual tradition, it is said that we all come into this world as bowls of light, containing the radiance of heaven, but that over time, our bowls tend to get filled with rocks, which block the light. And these rocks are fear, guilt, anger, envy, negative thoughts and feelings of any kind. Our eyes were made to see the light. But if the sandman sprinkles sand into them, we go to sleep, and we can't realize our highest and best. We may dream lovely dreams, but they do us no good until we wake up and start turning those dreams into reality. Waking up takes effort, but it's worth it. The more mindful we are, the more we're truly awake and alive, the more positively we can direct our lives. It's all about paying attention. Awake, you who are sleeping, and arise from the dead. God is giving you light. This is the light that chases away the darkness of the soul, the dark shadows of perception. It is the light that empowers us and keeps us from going through life as a zombie. Writing in the Science of Mind textbook, Ernest Holmes tells us, as one awakens from a nightmare, so the mentality awakes from the dream of a living death to a realization of eternal life. This awakening is a process of evolution, a little here, a little there, until the whole eye is opened, and we see that life is neither separate from God nor different from good. Life is God, and good is the only power there is, or can be. To awaken oneself is to be healed, made prosperous, happy, and satisfied, to be made every bit whole, to be complete as we were intended to be. God is a God of the living and not of the dead. Waking up means we realize that our nightmare has no power in and of itself. Waking up from our nightmare means we are no longer paralyzed. Waking up means we see the good in everyone and everything. Waking up means that we're so alert that we hear what we need to hear when we need to hear it. And we can hear the still small voice that's always speaking the truth about who we are and what we can do. Waking up means we're totally aware that we already have everything we'll ever need. Waking up means we're totally aware that we are already who we need to be. Waking up means to realize that we're perfect, whole, and complete. We don't need self-improvement in the sense that we need to change who we are. Who we are is just fine. We just need to wake up to all of who we are, to live and act and love from that awareness. You are enough. Always have been, always will be. All the negative things that we feel, fearing that we're bad and wishing that we were good, feeling that we don't measure up, none of those things touch our basic worth and wealth. They're like clouds that temporarily block the sun. Always, our warmth and brilliance are still there. It is not about self-improvement. It's about waking up to who we really are. At any given moment, we're one blink of an eye away from being fully awake. And when we fully awaken, we realize the truth and power of the unity prayer. The light of God surrounds me. The love of God enfolds me. The power of God protects me. The presence of God watches over me. And wherever I am, God is, and all is well. So when you wake up in the morning, open your eyes and take a good look around. Everywhere you look, you'll see things that wake you up to you. As you go about your week and through your daily routines, pay attention. Actively notice all the wonderful things that exist everywhere you look, if you're looking for them. Wake up and arise from the dead, and God will give you light. And in the glow of that light, you'll see that we really do live in a wonderful world. And so it is.